welcome everyone. If you're here with us, this means that you have successfully completed your training for your PMP exam. Congratulations on that. Some of you have submitted your application. Uh, we know that we have some good news on that, so we'll continue hopefully getting more good news, and we're here to help you. So this is a continuation of the process. What we're going to be doing tonight is uh, we cover all the content in the 35 hours in the different sessions that we had with your different instructors, and Pete is here tonight. I also wanted to acknowledge we have some special guests, Ron Papa from the Great Lakes chapter. Thank you, Ron, for attending. It's great to have you with us, and hopefully this is good information for everyone. So the agenda that we have for tonight, this is what we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about the exam content outline and what it means for the exam. We'll start with that. Then we're going to go over the question types and styles. We're going to understand the different types and different styles of questions in the PMP exam, because that changed, as you know, in January, on January 2nd, the current year, 2021, we have different type of questions compared to the previous version of the exam. We're also going to talk about Agile and the implications on the PMP exam. We're going to talk about the exam experience after that. As we mentioned before, you have two options now. You can go to a testing center or you can take the exam from home. It is your preference. Both options are valid, and it's great that we have options, but we're going to go a little bit over the different considerations that you got to keep in mind. And last but not least, we're going to cover the strategy aspect and some recommendations, and we'll give you access to some additional resources that will help you with your preparation. So we have talked about some of them, but we'll give you access to even more resources. And the second portion is going to be, we're going to do some practice. We're going to have some questions, and we're going to go over the questions, and we're going to be able to start seeing some of the content that we cover tonight. So kind of two sections, and this is hopefully good information. It's a compilation of lessons learned, like I mentioned before, and this is really an important information that will help you to be successful with your exam. So before we start, are there any questions? All right, let's get started. Okay, so this is often overlooked in regards to what I'm going to be, what are going to be facing in the exam. What are they going to be testing me? What type of specific knowledge are you going to, am I going to be tested on in the PMP exam? And if you remember, in step one of our base camp, we gave you access to a very important resource, which is the exam content outline. So that document answers that question. It covers from pages 4 through 10, covers the 3 domains that you're going to be tested on: people, process, and business environment. People is 42% of your exam, process is 50% of your exam, and then business environment is the remaining 8% of your exam. Within those domains, as you can see in the figure here, there are different tasks. And those are the tasks that you are supposed to know for the exam. The content that we cover in the 35 hours of instruction covers all those tasks. So it is important to know that this is what you're going to be tested on. Make sure, if you haven't done so yet, print out your exam content outline, look at the tasks, and know that is the syllabus of your exam. That's what you're going to be tested on. So you need to know that. And also, the recommendation is to perform a SWOT analysis. Identify, and what do I mean by that? Identify your strengths, identify your weaknesses, and then of course opportunities and threats. That's the other two components, but mostly focusing on your strengths and weaknesses and the areas that you have to improve. A tip that we have is once you print out the document, highlight your strengths and also the areas that you need to improve. This task, I'm not familiar with this particular task in the people domain, so I need to work on this a little bit more. That's also going to help you to understand the knowledge gaps that you might have. So it is important that you do that. One of the lessons learned from this is from a non-PIC student. This student found a question about personality indicators in the exam and didn't recall seeing anything in the content about personality indicators. But if you look at the exam content outline, task number 14 talks about personality indicators. Those are Myers-Briggs and DISC. Those are examples. And we covered that in the class. So you have to really make sure that you make the association. The tasks are going to, that's the syllabus, that's the context, right? So if you find that any of these tasks you're not familiar with, it is mark it, I will mark it for either an area of improvement with yellow, highlighted in yellow, or in red if you need to work on it, really have no clue, but we cover that. So make sure that you are able to establish the association to the content. You have your student kit from PMI and also from PEAK. So make sure that you identify your areas of improvement and your weaknesses. That's a good strategy. So I see that we have a couple of questions. Barb I'm sorry, I thought we had some questions. So thank you, Barb, for putting those links in there.
Sure, no problem. Step 1 of Basecamp includes this exam content outline that in its entirety, you can download it.
Absolutely. So it is important. Print it out, identify your strengths, identify your areas of improvement, and identify your weaknesses and what you need to work on. It's really important. It is impressive the number of people that don't understand the context of the exam. I want to know what I'm going to be tested on. So the exam content outline is going to answer that for you. Any questions on that before we move on to the next topic? Esther, go ahead.
Of course, right? Have you found anything that's outside of the content outline that has been on the exam? Has there been any of that experience?
That's a good question, but we also have to remember one thing. For the exam, and that's a great question, by the way, you are going to be evaluated on even though it's 180 questions, the number of questions that are going to count towards your result is 175. There are 5 questions that PMI is using. We could probably call those prototype, Barb. Prototype questions that might be they're testing future enhancements of the exam, but remember, you are not going to know which one of those questions are those prototype questions that PMI is kind of testing. So always focus on 180 questions, answer every single question. Probably that's what I'm trying to say. But you might find, so the answer is, it depends. You might find some questions that are not going to be related to this, but honestly, you have to assume that everything is in scope. All the questions that you have to answer all of them. But if you notice maybe that you remember one question was way off compared to what I to what I studied, maybe it is a prototype question, but still try to answer that question. Don't leave it unanswered. It might count. You have to answer every single question on your exam. That's the advice. That's the recommendation. Barb, would you like to add on that?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. And sometimes you'll have a question that doesn't seem to be exact, but that's PMI style. They won't ask it the way it looks in this bullet point, but it will fall under that task. So, but I agree wholeheartedly with what Orlando's saying. And I wouldn't dwell too much on, oh, is this one of those questions, the prototype
No.
or experimental? Just push right through all of them
Yeah.
and do your best.
And if it's way off, do your best. By now we probably have covered. Remember what I used to say about PMI's way of thinking? So start, and what's going to help you with that is your muscle memory using the simulator. So you kind of have there are some patterns that you're able to identify, and that requires a lot of practice. So do your best. If it's something that is way off, always try to do your best. What will, and it's a question that I like to ask, that I ask myself in the exam. What would PMI do in this particular situation? If I have no option, I'm a little bit lost here. So what think, put on your PMI hat and answer that question. What will PMI do in this particular scenario? So
Probably make a plan.
probably, but the most PMI-esque question. That's
Yeah.
the recommendation.
They probably make a plan. I don't know what the question is, but the answer might be make a plan.
Unless it is an agile question, right? So,
Yeah. Well,
all
Thank
right.
you.
You're very welcome. Good question. So any other questions about the exam content outline? Are we clear that this is our syllabus? This is what we're going to be tested on. We need to know this, get familiarized with this. This is also going to answer probably some of the questions that you have. What do I need to really work on? This is going to help you to be efficient with your time. So print it out, highlight with your different markers, color markers, and make sure that you know your strengths, your areas of improvement, and your weaknesses. All right. And this is going to help you with the simulator as well. So it's in correlation. Any questions on this? All right. Our next topic, question types. We have been able, based on the lessons learned that we have gathered so far, almost every single question is situational. In the past, there were some questions that were related to definitions, not many. Most of them were situational, but there were a few related to inputs, tools, and techniques and outputs, not many, but there were some in the exam. But now, based on the intel that we have been able to gather, most uh, more than 95% of the questions are situational. That means scenario based. Okay, that's a good thing. The the second lesson learned that we have been able to gather is that you need to be ready for 5 different type of questions. We have, this is one of the big changes with this new version of the exam, and we have multiple choice, we have multiple responses, we have matching, we have hotspot, and also something that calls limited fill in the blank. So a hotspot is click on a chart. For example, an example of that would be, you probably remember a process in quality, right? And to determine whether this process is out of control or not, we covered some topics. Remember your upper control limit, lower control limit. Then you have the mean right in the middle, and then you had your plot points of your process, right? Represented, plotted in that graph. They might ask you, is this process out of control? Identify the area of this process that is out of control. So remember rule of 7 and all those great topics that we cover, quality. So that's just an example that I will have for a question. Can you pinpoint where this process is out of control? So that could be an example of a possible click on a chart, hotspot type of question. fill in the blank is instead of choosing the right question, what they're going to ask you is type in the letter. It's going to be A, B, C, or D, and you're going to have to type in the letter. Honestly, to me, that's not different from the multiple choice with just picking one specific. I don't really know why PMI went this route, but it is a possible type of question that you might be facing, right? A, B, C, or D, and you have to type in the letter that corresponds with the right answer. So they call it limited fill in the blank. So, but that's what it is, putting the letter that is associated with that. Matching questions. You have two columns side by side. An example would be the different type of responses that we have for positive risks or negative risks, right? For, how do we call negative risks? What's the word that we use for negative risks?
Issues.
No, threats.
Threats.
Correct. Threats. Yeah, we call those threats. So if we remember, it will be, we have 5 different responses that we use for that. So for the matching, it could be that on one column on the left, you have the different responses that we have for threats or negative risks. And then in the right, we have another column with the explanation or the definition of each response. So you have to match what you have on the left column, what you have on the right column. That will be an example. Or for example, another example will be the Tuckman ladder, right? The different stages of forming a team, development, of team development, right? So forming, storming, norming, performing, adjourning, and then the definitions of each one of them. And then you'll have to match the definitions with the corresponding explanation. So that is matching or drag and drop. Then you might have some multiple right answers. This is probably one of the biggest changes. Before, until 2020, it was only one right answer, the right answer, like some of us called it, or the right PMI answer. I think Pete has some stories on that. And but now that has changed. You might have some questions that might read, choose 3 options. They might give you 7, for example, or 8. And the question might say, choose 3 options or choose 2 options. So you have to choose 3, not just 1, 3, or 2, or whatever number they have in the question before, in order to answer that question, and even before you can move on. But most of the questions are the traditional one right answer type of question. So that's those are the different types, and this is a big change in the question format compared to previous versions of the PMP exam. But you need to be ready for that, right? Be cognizant that is different type of questions that you're going to be facing is different from what you experience what other people, other students experience in the past. So any questions here? Any questions about the questions?
I'll ask one if you don't mind, Orlando.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So with the multiple right answer one, where you have let's say 3 out of 7 or 8, if you've gotten 2 of them correctly, do you get any partial credit that you're aware of for that, or is it you've got to have all 3 right before you get the full credit?
That's a good question, but so a couple of things is, let's put that. That's a great question, by the way, Ron. PMI is really cryptic when it comes to the results, right? They don't provide a score. It's a pass or fail exam. So my recommendation would be to all of you that are going to be taking the exam, try to pick three, the best three or the best two based on the answer. As far as I know, they haven't officially given any explanation, and this is just my speculation, on partial credit. It is possible, but my advice will be assume that it's that it has to be you gotta, my recommendation would be going back to kind of similar to what we said about the prototype questions, right? Try to do your best answering the if it's three options, pick the best three options based on what you know. Trust yourself and try to do your best at all times. Try to do what they're telling you, because like I said, it's not it's a pass or fail exam, and PMI really doesn't share the scores. We don't have access to that. Even as ATPs, it's only PMI is super is cryptic, is very strict with the scores. We don't know the actual scores. Everything that you read on the internet is just speculation, unless it comes directly from PMI, but everything else is just speculation. Some people say 65%, 75%, I've seen 80%, etc. But it's just speculation. So my advice will be, it is possible, going back to your question, that they provide partial credit, but the recommendation is choose the best three options if that's the question, what the question is asking, or choose the best two options if that's the question. Assume that it's an all or nothing. I would say that would be my advice. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I'll add one thing to that, Orlando, and it is that this time last year, PMI was conducting a pilot of this new exam, and they allowed, I think it was 600 people to take the new version of the exam. And my guess is that PMI didn't even know how they were going to score it until they saw the results from those 600 people, because those people didn't get the immediate feedback that you will when you hit I'm finished, complete, are you sure? Yes, you'll know immediately. They had to wait weeks and weeks. And I think that was part of PMI needing to calibrate how they were going to score this exam. And of course, once they decided, they definitely didn't tell us, but that just gives you a little bit of insight to how they would have decided how they were going to score it without telling us. But
Exactly. Yeah, there was. Thank you, Barb, for adding that. They did that last year. They had to wait months actually to get the results of those people that went through the pilot, and it's calibration. But always, even though, and going back to what we mentioned before about the number of questions, yes, it is 175 that counts towards your score. But remember, they're not going to tell you which ones are the 5 answers that are part of the pilot, right? So it's 180 questions. Answer every single question. If they're asking you for three options, pick the 3 that you think are the right answers. Or if it's a choose 2 type of question, then choose 2. So assume an all or nothing, and you'll be on the safe side. That'll be a recommendation. We also have in the slides, there is a link to PMI's website where you can see a little bit more. This is public information that they have on the new type of questions, if you want to elaborate on that. All right, so 5 type of questions, very interesting. Questions on the questions?
Orlando, you'll be sending this deck, right?
Yes, we'll be sharing this with all of you. Mm-hmm. All right, so we have types, but we also have styles. We have different styles, and the practice that we're going to do a little bit later is related to the styles. Okay. Most questions, as we said before, are scenario based, but they can be ambiguous. They can be tricky. They're not going to be straightforward. They're not going to be no-brainer type of questions. They're going to be a little bit ambiguous. So we have to, we're going to use, we're going to provide some tips on that. Okay. They're not industry specific, they're industry neutral. That's also because by definition, project management can apply to any industry. You, as a PMP, you can manage projects in any industry. The principles are not going to change. What changes is the application, the scope of your projects, but by definition, you can apply that to an industry, and that also applies to the exam. Most of the questions are, and this is another lesson learned that we have been able to gather so far. And by the way, a big caveat that I want to mention is that this is information. Remember, today's March the 9th, so it's only been 2 months and a week after the change. So this is what we have been able to compile so far. It is subject to change. It can change. But so far, this is the information that we have been able to compile about the exam. But this can change. So that's a little caveat that that I wanted to make sure that we were aware of. So far, most of the questions are structured in a way that will require you to identify what is the next step for the project manager. What should I do next? Most of the questions are phrased in that way, looking for the next steps. So that requires step number one is that we need to read the question properly, not jump into conclusions, take our time, right? Read the question, but of course, keep a good pace, right? It's not that we're going to be spending 10, 20 minutes on each question. We don't have time for that, but we have to understand the scenario question so we can determine then the next steps. So a lot of questions are going to be about what should I do next as a project manager. Also, we have been saying that it is important to put on your PMI hat and wear your PMP PMI hat, answer questions based on that, not on your actual work experience, because in some cases it might be a little bit different. So I think that has been shared with you in the preparation class. So remember this, the exam is based on the PMI provided content. It is a best practice, right? It's a compilation of best practices. In some cases, it might be a little bit different from what we do on a daily lives as a project manager. So answer the questions based on the PMI's way of thinking. But also keep in mind that one of the things that we have been able to understand with the change is that real life still makes sense and it's not that different. So I think they're really getting better at that. And the exam is not that different from what most PMs do in real life. So still common sense is not going away, right? But remember, wear your PMP hat, your PMI hat at all times, and always ask the question, what will PMI do? So, and you'll be on the right track for the exam. Then there is also, especially when it comes to the one right answer, the traditional type of question that we faced in the past, you have to look for the best right answer. I know that sounds a little bit strange, but it is true. And usually what happens is that you are able, if you're looking for only one right answer, right? If that's the type of question that you are facing, it is usually easy to eliminate one or two options, and then you have the remaining two. So you're going to have a total of 4. So 1 or 2 you can eliminate, but then you have between those two, you got to pick the right answer. It's not just a good answer. Probably both of those are good answers. You have to pick the right answer. Okay, so make sure. And how do you determine which one is the best right answer? PMI's way of thinking. Okay, what would PMI do? Remember your preparation, your content. By now, you have been able to identify a pattern, PMI's way of thinking, using the different tools. Pete mentioned something that applies to predictive to the T. Create a plan for everything, right? Risk, procurement, scope, schedule, budget, so or cost. So create a plan. You need to have a plan, a strategy, and then one big umbrella that covers all those plans that we call. How do we call that big umbrella? Does anybody remember? All those different specific plans come together into a big umbrella. Does anybody remember?
The project
Project
management
plan.
The project management plan, right? So yes, we have specific plans for each specific area of the project, but then they all come together. So that is part of PMI's way of thinking. Uh, it boils pretty much down in its core to plan, do, check, act. Does anybody remember where plan, do, check, act cycle comes from?
Deming.
It's Mr. William Deming, correct. So that is, we take a step back, we analyze the situation, what can we do about it, and then we put that into action and we take a look at the results that we're getting, right? So that's the approach for those questions. Take a step back, read the situation, and there's going to be one of those. Most of the answers are going to be you can do something with what you have to address the situation, but you got to analyze it, understand the right course of action, and then implement that course of action that you're able to identify. So think in those terms, and in most cases, unless it is something outside of your level of authority as a project manager. If that's the key, if it's something outside of your um, level of authority, then you that in those situations you'll have to escalate. But usually most of the questions are written in a way PMI wants to they want you to be proactive, do something as a project manager, use the tools that you have learned that we cover in the 35 hours, right, to address a specific situation and find, and that's going to be your best answer. So think in those terms. All right, so I told you that I had a good surprise for you tonight, and this is about earned value management. I know that some of you have had long nights and memorizing the formulas and really understanding about forecasting, TCPI, and the different scenarios, the 4 scenarios for forecasting, and those great and beautiful formulas that we cover in the class. So far, and then again, big caveat that we mentioned before, so far, only 2 months and a week in, not many formula related questions. That has been the that has been from several sources. We have been able to determine that that is the case as of now. So you should expect some trick questions about earned value management and even critical path, but not many questions that are related to that. So what they're trying to do is there are going to be reference to CPI and SPI most likely, right? And it is very important to understand the definitions. And this is something that your instructors told you repeatedly. It is not only knowing the formula and knowing how to calculate CPI and SPI and know the formula. You need to know the interpretation. Okay, you need to know what it means to have a CPI of 1.2, 1.3. You need to know what it means to have an SPI of 0.8 or 0.6. You need to understand what that means. When it comes to the definitions, it is important to know definitions of all the metrics in earned value management, CPI, SPI, schedule variance, cost variance, forecasting as well. Then for critical path, again, the definition of critical path, what it means, right? Also float, and also decisions that you're going to be able to make that will require some techniques, like, for example, schedule compression, fast tracking. We need to know what that means. So they're all intertwined and they're all interconnected. So we need to know what they mean. We need to know about resource leveling and resource smoothing. We need to know what it means. So if you know that, those definitions, you're clear on the definitions, chances are that you're going to be able to answer correctly any questions related to end value management and critical path. So important takeaway here, focus on the definitions. You need to understand definitions. You need to understand the interpretation of the results. Your Pinbook Guide 6th edition for earned value management has on page 267, there is a column that will tell you exactly the definition, the interpretation of the results that you get, what it means to have a CPI of more than 1. So by the way, is that good or bad for your project? Your
More than
CPI
one?
is 1.2. Is that good or bad? That's good, right? Okay. And your SPI is 0.6. Is that good or bad? That's bad.
That's bad.
Correct, Cyril. Thank you. That's that we have to bring that back on track. So the questions are tricky. That's another lesson learned that we have been able to gather. The questions are going to try to make you believe that you have to calculate a value, some of the questions at least, but the value is either in the question itself or the answer was not a value. But how can we answer those questions? We need to know the definitions. If we are clear on the definitions, it doesn't really matter how they try to trick us or confuse us. We know the definitions clearly, and we're going to be able to pinpoint those little tricks. Okay, so you have to read the question properly, and you understand your definitions, and then you're going to be able to, oh, this is a little trick here. So I see what they're asking me for. Bart, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to add one comment to the best right answer bullet point.
Absolutely,
Because
absolutely.
one thing that can happen, especially if you're really nervous, is to get to the answers and you see one and you say, that is correct. And then you don't keep going because you think you found the right answer. But just make sure that you read all of the possibilities because there may be a better right answer. So just something to keep in mind as a tip, and to just take a deep breath and do review all of the choices before you commit to one. That's all I had for this slide.
Thank you. That's a good point. Does anybody have any questions about the question styles? Esther, Gabe, Megan? All right, so
The simulator really doesn't have these different types of things, right? I haven't done the full blown thing, just bits and pieces, but it only has the straightforward one answer is right.
For the most part, and it's also because most of the questions, and we have been able to gauge that, are the right answer. As I mentioned before, the matching questions are rather easy for the most part as well, as long as you understand the definitions. But most of your questions, and even if you look at the clone questions that were provided by PMI, the ones that you have, overwhelmingly, they are they're multiple choice, one right answer. So that's also going to be in the case for the exam. But some questions are going to be matching. Some questions are going to be more than one right answer. Not many. Most of them are going to be the best right answer. All right. All right. Any questions about the questions, or we're going to start talking about a big topic here? Agile. It is important to know Agile for the exam. As you have seen, covering the 35 hours of content, we were looking at things. There were two tracks that were running in parallel. We were looking at things from the predictive approach, from that standpoint, and also from the adaptive approach. The same things, but from those two perspectives, right? Why? Why is that? A lot of people ask that question. Why is PMI? Why did they add so much Agile to the exam? That's the ACP. That's it's really it's a big change. This is probably the most significant change in the exam. But there's a reason for that. I think it's a solid reason. I think it's a good thing that Agile was incorporated to exam, because that's what the current environment in project management is telling us. More and more and more organizations, not just software development, that was 20 years ago, but more and more and more organizations are using either a hybrid approach or they're switching to an Agile approach. So it is important. I'm actually happy that PMI is acknowledging that, and they're incorporating that to their PMP exam. So it's just current times, what we're going through, what we're experiencing right now. So going back to the exam, you have to keep in mind that 50% of your exam is going to be Agile related. 50% of the questions are going to be Agile related. So how many questions do we have in the exam? Does anybody remember?
180.
180. So that means that 90 questions are going to be related to Agile. So that's a huge number. So that also means that we have to know Agile for the exam. It's really important, really important. So a few things that we need to be aware of. Some questions are going to be related on how to transition from a predictive approach to an Agile approach. It is important to be clear on that. It's also important how the process groups relate to the Scrum sprint cycle. And basically, we do, if you look at it, the plan, do, check, act, going back to the core that we do in a predictive project, we do it at a larger scale, right? What we do in an Agile project, we're going to do all of that, but in a shorter period of time that we call iteration or sprint if it's Scrum. So we do plan for the sprint. We of course there's some work that gets done, so we execute on that. We do some checking because we have a ceremony. How do we call that ceremony that we, does anybody remember, in which we showcase what we have done to our customers and our stakeholders to gather feedback? How do we call that? Does anybody remember?
Demo.
The demonstration.
But yeah, that's what we do. But there's another term for that.
The retrospective, right?
Well, that is for lessons learned, but we have a sprint review session. That's the retrospective is part of it too. So yes, it is part of monitoring and controlling. Yes, to gather lessons learned, but it's also the review session where you capture that feedback specifically. So yes, and also the retrospective.
Orlando, if I can jump in on that, that demo, the word demo, it's commonly called that because that is what happens during the sprint review.
Yeah.
But I would recommend, because it's only 14 pages, the Scrum Guide. It's free, the download of the Scrum Guide, and it talks about each ceremony, what it's called, and what the team member roles are. It's a great document to review Agile, because even though we use generic Agile, Scrum is the flavor of Agile that this exam follows. So
great point.
Thanks,
great point.
Orlando.
Thank
So
you,
Barb,
Barb.
just to be clear, you're saying that not only look at the Agile practice guide, but look at the Scrum guide too, right?
Yes.
Yes, I think the Scrum Guide is worth it. The read, only 14 pages, very brief.
Give them a link to that, because I don't think
Yeah, I'll do it right now.
I didn't
I'll find
distribute
it.
that to my cohort, so.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have added that to the link. Maybe in the updated version, we'll add that link to the last slide as well. So thank you, Barb.
Thanks.
That's a good point. Most of, as Barb said, that is the most common flavor of Agile, Scrum. and a lot of questions are going to be related to Scrum. So understand how it relates, because that's what's going to help you to answer those questions about how to transition from predictive to agile, right? You're still doing very similar things, but you're going to do it in a shorter iteration. Does anybody remember what is the recommended duration of an iteration or sprint? Anywhere from
1 to
two,
4 weeks.
2 weeks,
2 to 4 weeks, right?
2 to 4,
So,
4 being the max.
mhm,
Oh, damn, Philip.
2 to 4, exactly. So we're doing all of those things that we do for a predictive project in a matter of 2 to 4 weeks. So basically, that's what it boils down in Agile, right? So that with all the advantages that come with that, we're constantly engaging our stakeholders. We're able to make course corrections. We are able to get the feedback, and if priorities change, we are changing that every 2 to 4 weeks, and we're always making sure that we are working on the right things. So that is why Agile is so prominent nowadays. Also, several questions are going to be related. Remember that projects are done by people, and some of the slide decks were related to people, and that's actually a domain, part of the exam content outline. So several things that happen with people that work in our projects. We have stakeholders and we have project team members. Conflict is going to happen. So conflict management, huge for the exam. You need to know how to address conflict. Remember, conflict can also be productive, but it has to be properly managed. And we cover those ways of addressing, managing conflict. You have to know that for the exam. Motivation issues, how to address creating that sense of urgency, as we cover in our content as well, and making sure that the team, remember, you're the spokesperson, you're the liaison between the rest of the organization and your project team. So make sure that the team members understand how things are connected. That is to to the larger picture of the organization. Right? There is a reason why we're working on this project. So you need to make sure that the team understands that. That's going to help with motivation. And team development is training, the skill set. You might not have it there 100%. So you're expected to work on that with your team. And also you got to train your stakeholders. It's not just a team, but also work with the stakeholders and provide that awareness and training. So we have to train the team and train the stakeholders as well. You have to be familiar with all the Scrum ceremonies. It is important. We have mentioned some of them here. There's one, the daily Scrum. It is something that at peak, this is something that we practice. Unfortunately, we don't do it on a daily basis, but we do it as often as possible. But make sure that you are 100% clear on what it means, the different ceremonies. There are not that many. The team roles, right, in Scrum, and what are their responsibilities. So we have one very important team member, the product owner. What is the main responsibility of the product owner? Does anybody remember? And I think Todd, you're probably on mute. I think you're trying to answer.
The product backlog?
Yes, that is the main. Make sure the product owner is going to be in charge of reprioritizing that product backlog, right? Every 2 weeks we have we go over sprint planning, and that's one of the key aspects. Product owner is responsible for making sure that the team is working on the right priorities. These priorities, every 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, the priorities can shift. So the product owner being the liaison between the stakeholders, the customer, and the team, has to make sure that we are working on the right priorities. The right priorities are at the top of our product backlog. So you need to understand that for the exam. Also, again, being able to compare predictive versus agile, the limitations and shortcomings that you have, and also understanding when is it better to use a predictive approach and when is it better to use an agile approach. Does anybody remember what is the key aspect of any project that will tell you which one is the best approach?
The
Cool.
level of scope definition.
The type of scope, exactly. So if your scope is well defined, what would you use?
Predictive.
Predictive.
Like in construction, right? It's usually well defined. They narrow that down to a science. But if it's complex and changing, you know right off the bat that it's going to be changing, what would you use?
The agile.
Agile.
Agile approach, right? And what if it's a combination? Some areas of the scope are well defined. We know them really well, understand them really well, but some other areas are not that well defined. What approach would you use?
Hybrid.
Iterative.
Kind of a hybrid, right? So you can you can mix and match. It's always a possibility. Another important aspect of the exam, some key terminology that keeps coming up: minimum viable product, MVP, related to your scope, to your product backlog, right? It is important to understand that. And a minimum viable product has another name. Does anybody remember what's the other name of minimum viable product?
Prototype?
No.
No.
The business something or other. Oh, I forgot.
It's MMF. Those are the initials. Also known as MMF.
Sales.
Minimum marketable features. So PMI might ask you a question about MVP, and we're thinking that is the most valuable player for the American League, but they're using the term MMF, which kind of sounds like wrestling, kind of, sort of. So it is two different terminologies, but two different terms for the same thing. So make sure that, and PMI is notorious for that. They might be asking you a question about MVP, but they use MMF because they know that most people are not keeping up with that. And that's probably an easy question, but you start second guessing yourself, and that's exactly what they do. So make sure that you know that MVP equals MMF. All right. So know that for the exam. The definition of done, that's another one that keeps coming up as well as a lesson learned. It's going to be in your exam. Chances are that it's going to be in your exam. Make sure that you are familiar with what it means, the definition of done. It means done. Done is not 90% done. It's done, and it's very clear. So make sure that you know that for your user stories and what it really means to be, what is the definition of done. So make sure you are clear on those two. Also, again, it keeps coming up. Most questions are related to Scrum, to Kanban. No Kanban. There's a Kanban board. What is a Kanban board? It's an example of what? Does anybody remember? It's a type of?
Information radiator.
Correct. It is a type of information radiator. We try to show it's low technology tool usually that shows the different stages of the work that the team is working on, right? So the list of things are the to-dos that they have, then the work in progress, what has been completed, what has been tested, or anything that is blocked, and also what is done, right? So remember that for the exam. No basic terminology, and one of the important aspects of Kanban is work in progress. There are limits for that to make sure that it is efficient and try to move everything through the queue, through the flow. Also, leadership styles. Remember, servant leadership, that is huge for the exam. You might get a few questions on that. Understand that it's not the command and control approach that we were used to in the 80s. Is servant leadership for Agile. And also, of course, Agile implementation. So huge topic. Agile, please make sure that you are able to, that you know Agile for the exam, 90 questions approximately are going to be related to Agile. And these are the highlights, but there's more to it, right? So make sure that you sharpen your skills when it comes to Agile and you're ready for your Agile questions. In your Pmp simulator, you have plenty of questions that are Agile related. There's a pre-created exam that you can take that is only for Agile, and yeah, make sure that you take it and practice. And also, as Bart mentioned, read the Scrum guide. That's a good advice. The Agile practice guide that also has plenty of information. It's one of the most important references for the exam. And also, the Pinbook 6th edition has a section. Each of the knowledge areas of the project has some in the introduction section has some Agile considerations. That's how they call it, Agile considerations. Make sure that you read those, because that's also going to help you to understand Agile implications when it comes to scope, when it comes to procurement, when it comes to risk, if you want to dig deeper on those specific areas of your project. So really important. I can't stress that enough. Agile is super important. If you don't do well in Agile, you're going to struggle with the exam. 90 questions are going to be Agile related in average, right? So super important for the exam. Any questions about Agile? All right, no questions. Any comments? Any?
I have a question.
Sure.
I think it was in the last training session with our group that we had talked about having a side-by-side comparison of predictive versus adaptive type things. What here would be equivalent to, what in predictive would be equivalent to adaptive or Agile. I can't remember where we landed with that. Is there such a reference available to us that we can say?
We can provide something on that. It's mostly, but it boils down, Esther, to what happens at a larger scale in a predictive project. You know, and say that your project is a 6-month duration project, it's going to happen in 2 to 4 weeks in the Agile project. That's what it boils down to. Of course, at a high level view, we still do planning, we still do execution, we still do monitoring and control, we gather lessons learned, but we do that in 2 to 4 weeks. But yeah, we can provide some additional resources so you can see the difference between the two and the comparison. But it boils down to that. It's a mini project. What you do in 6 months, you're doing that in every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or every 4 weeks. So that's the main difference. All right. So huge for the exam, Agile. Make sure that you take enough questions and you're familiar with Agile. This is super important. You're not going to pass your exam if you're not Agile versed. Let's put it that way. Right?
Orlando, something that I've been
Yes.
hearing about Agile and seeing some sample questions around it comes down to, you have a scenario and you're struggling with your team, you're struggling with something on Agile, and your options that are given to you are, I'm going to reprioritize the work to do this, I'm going to do this, this is going to be my solution. Almost every time it actually comes down to making sure that the team understands Agile. That's the first best right answer, usually with Agile, is making sure that if there's an issue with your leadership, does your leadership embrace Agile? Do they actually embrace it at the enterprise level? If your team members are struggling with work, making sure that those team members are properly trained in Agile. So it's kind of this theme that your responsibility as an Agile leader is to make sure that your team actually understands Agile, and that, like Orlando said, it's not top down telling your team what to do. It's more of that servant leadership. So keep an eye out for those types of questions.
Great point, Mark. Great point. Any other questions over Agile? All right, so we know that it's very important for the exam. Now we're going to talk about the PMP exam experience. And this is related to the two flavors that we have for the PMP exam, and some lessons learned that are gonna help us. So when it comes to the exam experience, it boils down to two options that you have. You can either go to a testing center, and for those of you that your application has been accepted, you can continue, make the payment for the exam, and then the PMI website is going to ask you to choose whether you want to use a testing center or you want to take the exam online. Right? Those are the two options. If you decide to use a testing center, go to a testing center, which was the only option in the past. Keep in mind that they're strictly following the COVID-19 guidelines, the CDC guidelines. That means that you're going to have to wear a mask for 4 hours. I have heard in some cases that they ask students to wear gloves as well. So some of them might not, but really that changes, right? As CDC guidelines are being modified all the time. So, but be prepared at least to have to wear a mask for 4 hours, pretty much the duration of the exam. A recommendation is do not wait until the day of your exam to find out where the testing center is, right? So we will recommend you to a week before to drive, figure out the address, drive, and understand how far it is from home, and make sure that you give yourself plenty of time in order to get to your exam, because otherwise your stress levels are going to go through the roof. So you want to make sure that you minimize that. That's mitigation, right? That's a risk that you identify. Being late for your exam, that's the risk. So the mitigation will be you want to in advance find out the location and give yourself plenty of time. That will be the response to that risk, right? Make sure that yes, you're familiar with the testing center. Also, this one applies. This lesson learned has come up several times. It's 4 hours. It's if you take the two 10-minute breaks, it's going to be 250 minutes, right? So it's 4 hours. It's a long time. So most people say that for them, they will recommend to take it as early as possible in the day. But a little caveat here, and I'm going to share my own experience. I took it at a testing center. I am not a morning person. I wish the day could start at 10 a.m., but it doesn't. So when I took my PMP exam, knowing that the two windows that I had was one that started right at 8 a.m. So, and my testing center was about 45 minutes away from my home, and the second window was at 12:30. So it was from 12:30 to 4:30. So what did I do? I chose the second window. It was still early in the day enough, so it was noon. I had a chance to go to breakfast and have a nice breakfast and get there with plenty of time. I drove to the testing center. I was time. I didn't have to rush, and I was working on getting, try to keep the stress level under control as much as possible. But if you know that you are a morning person and at 6 a.m. you're wide awake and that's what works for you, well, take it as early as you can. But I would say later in the day, and that probably applies mostly to the people that take it from home, because you have even the chance to take it at 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night. I would recommend you to stay away from those windows, because it gets, I think that's a good lesson learned. As early as possible, but always play to your strength. So that would be the recommendation. Then if you are taking the exam, if you decide to go with the online Proctor version, you're going to be taking the exam from home. There is a check-in process, as there's also a check-in process with the testing center, but even with the online Proctor version, there is a check-in process. So give yourself plenty of time. I would say close to an hour. Make sure that you're ready for that exam, that you have a clear desk, nothing on your desk. If I show you my desk right now, the proctor will be not happy with me at all. I will be probably kicked out of the application. Your desk has to be clean, no papers, no books, nothing. Usually if they see a printer, they ask you put a cover on top of it or remove it from the room. So make sure, take the time and set the stage for your exam, making sure that you don't have anything on your desk, is clean. You're going to have to go through that checking process, take some pictures. They ask you to move around your camera and show them your room, and that nobody can come in, and you cannot leave that room unless it's during the breaks. Uh, and but make sure that you have everything ready for that day, those 4 hours. I know some ask their relatives to leave the house for the 4 hours and come back later. So make sure that you take all the precautions and don't take it lightly. Another lesson learned that came up is that do not use a work laptop for the PMP exam. As we know, and right now, most people working from home, we have at least two computers, right? One from work and a personal computer. Uh, Work computers have protect VPN, firewalls, etc. All those protections that, and rightly so, right? Uh, but that might interfere with your PMP exam. So do not risk it. Do not do that. Don't use a work laptop for your PMP exam. Use your personal laptop and make sure that it's ready. Uh, you cannot take the exam on a phone. It has to be a desktop or a laptop, but use your personal uh, computer for that. That's a recommendation. And last but not least, you have to make a decision in advance on whether you're going to be taking your exam at a testing center or taking the exam on using the online Proctor version. And again, take into account uh, your specific reality, right? If you know that your internet connection at home is not 100% reliable, go to a testing center. So don't risk it. If it's reliable 100% and you feel better in an environment that you're familiar with, you function better at home, don't go to a testing center. So always play to your strength, right? Little details, but they can make a difference.
Orlando, there's a great question in the chat about multiple monitors, and it's my understanding that you are not allowed to have a second monitor hooked up, and they run a scan of what software or
Yes.
what you have connected, so you aren't going to be able to have that second monitor
Yeah,
connected.
so the answer, yes, that is my understanding is the answer is no. You can run system check, a Pearson view, but yeah, it has been my understanding that the answer will be unfortunately no to that.
Yeah,
Good question, by the way, Todd. That's a really
yeah.
good question. So so decisions, right? You have to decide whether it is the online Proctor version best for you or the testing center. A good thing with before the testing provider was Prometric, the number of testing centers was limited, but nowadays with Pearson View, they have more testing centers available. So definitely going to find something within your vicinity that will work for you, if that's the case.
I would add one more thing. If you are going to go in person, bring a sweater. It gets so cold in those testing centers, and nothing's worse than being a little bit uncomfortable. So bring a sweater, especially if they're doing distancing and they don't have enough people generating any heat
Yes.
in there. It'll be a little more comfortable.
But also be ready. That's a good point. Yeah, if you know that you get cold, it's 4 hours. Usually they're very cold, but they're gonna. It's pretty much like going through an airport. They're gonna check on you. If you're wearing a sweater, they're gonna ask you to pull up your sleeves and see if you don't have anything, you know, in written or something. They might do that. So it's really they're gonna make sure that, and there's a camera watching you at all times. It's pretty much like going through an airport security checkpoint at an airport. So
Hey, Orlando,
be ready
to
for
that
that.
point,
Mhm.
for if you're taking a proctored exam, would it be smart to have an external camera so that you can actually easily scan the room and stuff? Or have you gotten any feedback on that?
It will
I haven't,
help, but
talked to
if
anybody
not,
about that.
you're gonna have to move around your laptop, right? So you have an integrated one. It's gonna be kind of that way to show them around. I know that they also have asked for pictures. They send you a link to a mobile app, and they can ask you for pictures, and you can submit the pictures to the
Gotcha.
proctor. So they have different ways of doing that. But yeah, if you have an external camera, it's easier. You can move it around and provide that. But be ready. And they also have a really good customer support, Pearson View. So we're gonna give you some links that will help you with that. So any questions
Orlando, what
about
about
this?
the breaks? If we are taking, because I know how it works when you're in person, but when it's
Mm-hmm.
online, how does the break work? Like, does
When
this
it's online,
person stay on while you're going to the bathroom, or like how does that work?
the proctor is gonna be logged in, but you're gonna have and we're gonna talk about breaks in a minute. That's probably the
Okay.
next slide. So we have
Okay.
the sequences probably, but yeah, it kind of works. It's pretty much the same. The conditions
Okay.
don't change, but we're gonna talk about that in a minute. But
I had
good
a,
question. Good
I
question.
had a similar question about having coffee with me.
Yeah,
The,
like are we allowed to have liquids and stuff with
you're not allowed to have any liquids, unfortunately. You can't have any water, like I said, your desk has to be clean, only your computer,
Okay.
and that's it, and
And
your knowledge.
are we able to like test out if the system is okay on our computers prior
Yes,
to the day of
yes,
the
you
test?
can. Yes, you can run a system check. I think we have the links for that in the last slide. You can definitely run way in advance, a system check, and it will tell you. But uh, but for a work laptop, it might tell you that it's okay, but don't do it. Don't use a work laptop. Use a personal laptop. Don't let a firewall or a VPN issue affect your connection. That's the last thing that you want to face in the exam, right? So use your personal laptop, and you'll be on the safe side. All right.
Orlando, another question.
Yes.
So the testing center. So I'm almost leaning towards the testing center because I have a rather intricate computer setup, and unhooking everything would just be quite untenable. But nevertheless, at the testing center, so are you going to be using a computer at the testing center as well? I
They
mean, it's
have
not a
they have
written.
computers. Yeah, they
So
have.
what I'm kind of concerned about or curious about is I think we broached this before as far as the whiteboard, right? I'm much faster with a pencil and paper than I am with that whiteboard. So when I get into the diagram tests and things along those lines, I'm like a slug if I have to use that calculator and whiteboard. So I'm almost leaning towards the testing center if in fact I can use a scratch piece of paper or something
Well,
along.
unfortunately, that is not the case. If you go to the testing center, what they're gonna give you is an erasable whiteboard with markers.
Well,
You're
that's
not
fine too.
gonna be able to use pen and paper. In Prometric, they did, but Pearson View is an erasable whiteboard that you can use with the markers, and that's what they give you. So yeah, keep that in mind, because if you made a great point, and that's our last bullet point here. If you're gonna take the exam from home, you have to get familiarized with Pearson View's whiteboard, digital whiteboard.
Can't stand
There are
it.
two ways that you can do that. You have it in your simulator. So it's towards the bottom. You have it in your simulator. You can it's the same application, the same application. And we're also going to give you a link to the official Pearson VUE whiteboard. That's part of the slides tonight. But you have to get familiarized with that for the exam if you're going to take the exam from home.
I know I asked this before, but with the whiteboard, like my computer has a touch screen. So does PMI get upset if you use a stylus for the whiteboard? Because I have the same thing. Like I can't use the whiteboard feature. It's just I can't do it with the mouse. So I'm trying to think if they don't let you use it with the stimulus, the whatever
The
it is.
stylus, yeah, the stylus, the stylus.
Yeah.
I am going to say that's a great question that I will definitely check with Pearson VUE directly. I'm going to
Okay.
say my assumption, right, is that you're
No.
not going to be able to use the stylus, but I will definitely, if I were in your situation, I will ask Pearson VUE directly. But my initial take, I don't know, Barb or Pete, what your thoughts are on that. But I think that will be a no.
I would say that it is a good idea to check. They're really funny about just standardizing everything and being so particular. And one thing I was going to say is don't let that part get in your head either. It happens in person or online where some of the requirements feel a little bit invasive. Like when you go in person, it feels a little like TSA, right? When I went in person, they make you turn your pockets inside out, show your socks, and they even went in my hair to, I guess they thought I had formulas hiding in there or something. And then online, you might just be thinking, right? You're just sitting here doing this, and they're like, please don't cover your mouth. It'll be something like that. Or if you accidentally go outside of the frame, they're going to say something. Don't let it throw you. It's everybody goes through that. And so the stylist to me kind of falls in that category
Yeah, I
of
would say no. I would say
yeah.
probably they're gonna say no. They don't even like. Some people like to read out loud questions. The proctors, we have gotten reports. The proctors tell them, do not do keep it quiet. You can be doing that. So it's keep that into account when making the decision. But the good thing is that following the guidelines, remember repetition, repetition, repetition. More important than the stylus or the whiteboard is what you have in here for the exam, your muscle memory. That's why we stress on a daily basis, take practice questions, go over the materials, make them your best friends, right? Like EEFs and OPAs, and Agile has to be your best friend now, 50% of the exam. So it it's gonna work. So don't feel that, oh, without using the whiteboard I'm not gonna be able to pass the exam. Absolutely not. It's a good idea. It's a good resource, right? It'll help you. It'll help you to do a brain dump. You have to do it, but it's not a must have. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
All right. So don't let that's not really the most important part. The most important part is using your simulator, reviewing the content, getting ready for the exam, taking thousands of practice questions, and you understanding Agile, and you will be in good shape for the exam. All right. So a segue about the exam experience. As we said before, we're going to have 180 questions in 230 minutes. That's the almost 4 hours, 3 hours and 50 minutes, right, for to answer the questions. You are going to have 2 built-in breaks of 10 minutes each, and that's in addition to the 230 minutes. So the total experience from beginning to end is 250 minutes. Okay, your 10-minute breaks are not mandatory. But one thing that you got to keep in mind, and you see the exam sequence here, when you take the break after the first section of the exam, after your first 60 questions, you have to submit those first 60 questions. And you're not going to be able to go back and make changes to that. In essence, you're basically taking, you could look at it this way, you're taking 3 separate exams. You could look at it that way as well. But once you submit the first 60 questions and you go to your break, you can't go back those 60 questions. You're going to work on the following 60 questions, right? At question 120, the next 60 questions, right? And then you'll get to your second break. So it's 60 questions, then your first 10-minute break, then 60 more questions, then you get to your second break of 10 minutes. You can go back to the previous section, and then you finish the last 60 questions, and then you submit your exam and you get your results. That's the sequence of the exam. The 10-minute breaks are not mandatory. This applies, by the way, going back to your question, Megan, this applies to both the online Proctor version of the exam and also at the testing center, the same mechanics. So that's not going to be a difference. The only difference is that you're going to be from home if you're doing it online, a Proctor version, or if you're going to be at the testing center, you're going to be able to go and use the restroom or etc. Right, to walk around a little bit for those 10 minutes. You don't have to take the full 10 minutes. It's up to you, but it's up to 10 minutes, right, that you have. And the mechanics are pretty much the same. During those 10 minutes, you can leave the room if you're online, etc. Go ahead, Peter.
Orlando, one question I've heard or has been asked is to say, if I decide not to take the breaks, do I still have to submit the first batch of questions?
It is my understanding that yes, you have to submit it.
Okay, that's what I told them too. All right.
Yeah, it's your option. You have to submit it, but it's your option to take or not to take the break.
Gotcha. Okay. I want to make sure that I had that. That's what I said. So I want to make that right.
And on the breaks, are there certain like regulations of what you can and can't do on the breaks? Because I know like when you're at the testing center, they're probably not going to give you your cell phone back. Right. But when you're online, we're not really turning in our cell phones. So like, are we able to check our phone during the breaks or no?
Well, you can leave the room and use it outside of the room, for example. But remember, you submitted your section, right? So you're not there. There's nothing that you can change or you don't know the next 60 questions either. So yeah. But to your point, this is another lesson learned about the exam experience. We have had 2 instances. I know, Barb, you're laughing. We shared this too. We had 2 students that had their cell phone. You can have it in the room because the proctor has the option to call you if you lose a connection or there's a problem. Have your cell phone in it for an emergency, right? To get in touch with a proctor. But be really careful. This happened twice. 2 different people, at least, that took the class with us. They submitted their exam, right? They got the results. They got the results right away. And when it said pass, congratulations, you passed your PMP exam. No, they both did the same. Their reaction was to grab that phone and call their significant others. One called the wife and a lady called her husband, and they were celebrating, and the proctor was still logged in. You have to wait until the whole application goes out. The proctor saw that and contacted the student to listen, you cannot do that. You're still under the application is still running, and we can invalidate your results even though you submitted your results. So you cannot do that. You're still, I'm still here. The application is not over. We got to do the checkout before when the application goes away, you have to wait until that happens because you're running that risk. So wait. I know it's going to be great, right? All of you are going to get that great message. Congratulations, you passed. But wait until you can celebrate, until everything is gone from your computer. And this is if you're taking it from home, of course. And that's when you can start the celebration. Don't do it right there and there, because you're going to be you're going to be preoccupied, right, with that situation. They can do that. So they do not put yourself in that situation. And the confirmation that you're gonna get, you're gonna see that message and it's gonna disappear rather quickly. Then you're gonna get an email the next day at around 7 a.m. with the confirmation that you passed the exam. So these two students they couldn't sleep that night. So until they got the confirmation email, and remember them sending us the confirmation, forwarding the email with a confirmation, and that's what, yes, it is 100% that we passed. So don't do that. Wait until the application disappears. So going back to the experience, you got to work on time management. This is important for the exam. Find your cadence, right? It's about dancing. Find your cadence. It is really important. When it comes to that time management, our recommendation is 60 seconds per question. Get used to that. Some questions might take more than 60 seconds, but some questions might take you only 5 or 10. That's how you can work on your time management and find your rhythm, which takes us to scoring early wins. When you first sit in front of that computer taking that exam, you're going to be stressed. We're all stressed. That's normal. But you have to overcome a snap out of that as quickly as possible. You have to find your rhythm, find that cadence. So you do that through scoring early wins. And by that is finding some questions that, oh, I know this, I know what the right answer is, and you start building that confidence. You have to snap from those initial moments of being, nervous and snap out of that as quickly as possible, so you can then start scoring those early wins. That's how you do it. And then you can finally find your rhythm, your groove for the exam. You really have to work on that as quickly as possible. Make the clock your friend, not your enemy. You do that with your time management skills, and also find that cadence. Find that rhythm as quickly as possible. The same rhythm that you got in your preparation when you're taking your practice test. That's why it's so important to take at least 3 or 4 full 180 question PMP practice exams before you face the real exam. So make sure that you do that. And if you're going to take it from home, work on practice your whiteboard. It's a little bit cumbersome, but practice a couple of weeks solid practicing that. It will help you to be proficient at a level that will allow you to use it during the exam. And then again, that's the sequence. So 60 questions break, 60 questions, another break, the last 60 questions, and congratulations, you passed your PMP exam. Questions about the experience?
At the center, you get the same message right there, right away, or if you do it at the center, you have to wait.
No, you get the same exact message. You get your congratulations right there and there. It's going to take a few seconds, and it'll tell you right away whether you passed or not. So you're not going to wait. And I think you can print out at the testing center, if I'm not mistaken, you were able to print out a sheet with the results. At least they gave you that. So, but at home, you gotta wait until next day to get the confirmation email. But you're gonna know right away whether it is from home or at the testing center.
But they don't tell you like how many questions you got right?
Nope.
It's just pass or fail.
Pass or fail. Pass or fail.
How well you did.
What they're gonna tell you is, that's a good question, Megan. They don't give you a score, but they're gonna tell you by domain how you did, right? Are you a target? Are you above target? Are you below target? So above target, AT, or you were AT, BT in the last one, etc. That's what they're going to tell you. They want to help you, right, to identify the areas of improvement that you need to work on, but they're not going to give you a score.
Are those going to be on your certificate?
No, your certificate is going to be,
say yes.
It's going to be, you're going to be, probably you can see mine in there. It's only going to say your name and your project management professional, and that's it.
Awesome.
Not going to say, It's not about A plus, a B minus PMP, A plus. It doesn't work like that. It's a pass or fail. You're either a PMP or you're not. So discrete. So that's
You passed my class summa cum laude though, Todd. So
there you go. You get little stars from Pete. So that you get.
stars and vessels.
If I can add just one bit of psychology to this,
Yes,
the
please,
test taking
please.
psychology, don't even think about the last 60 questions when you're on the second half or the the second half or third half, sorry, the first, second, or third part of the exam. Leave it behind you. Don't think would have, could have, should have at all. Just leave it behind you, because that can shake you.
Yes.
Don't question yourself. If you've studied this hard, and some things I've heard are when people just go back and start changing answers just willy-nilly without any actual reason for doing it. It's one thing to go, they almost got me on this one, but now I see. That's different than going back and doubting yourself and changing things. So I wouldn't do that either. And like Orlando said, those early wins, when I took my PMI ACP, I skipped the first 6 questions. I couldn't figure out, did I study for the wrong thing? What's going on here? What's happening? And then finally hit the groove. I don't know why it took 6 questions, but it did. And I passed. But if I had sat there and started to let that get in my head, it would have been a mess. So if you have to skip until you find the comfort zone, just do that. Don't even worry about it. You can go back.
So do you have to go back to those 6 questions, or they just keep throwing questions at you until
No,
you hit the number of 180?
your questions are randomized, and it's the moment you take question number 1, it's my understanding that the entire 180 are queued up for you.
Yes,
And
that is
so,
correct.
okay. And so even if you skip them, what you go back to would be those same questions that you left.
So that brings me to a very important point. It is about strategy. We're going to talk about strategy in a second. You have the option to mark for review, right? And you have it also in your simulator. So the questions that you're not sure or you're not familiar with, you can mark it for review and then come back later to answer them. But as you all know, with great power comes great responsibility. You can't overdo it either. So mark it for review when you really need to mark it for review. So we use, use at your own discretion. Don't overdo it, because you gotta still go back and answer those questions, and they might take more than 60 seconds. So it is strategy. It's part of time management, but it's also if you have no clue. And it also happens that during the exam, maybe that happened with the first 6 questions, like Barb mentioned, but as you start answering the questions, you might realize, oh, now I know what they were asking me before. That happens a lot. So maybe by going through some other questions, you might be able to understand, I can go back, I realized what they were asking me for once you find your groove. So that happens a lot. Also, as most of the questions are multiple choice, not all of them, as we know, we have 5 different type of questions. It is a statistically proven fact that changing the questions is the wrong strategy. If you were able to identify the best right answer in one of those multiple choice questions, don't go back and change it. Don't second guess yourself. If you do that, and if you don't believe me, try it in the simulator. If you start changing questions, you're going to see that you're going to get it wrong. And I got it right. There, you might be thinking that it's my gut feeling that is telling me that the right answer is A or B. It's not your gut feeling, it's your brain identifying patterns, because you have done so much study on the subject that your brain is already identifying patterns. And this is the lecture explanation of that, of gut feeling when it comes to multiple choice exams. So your brain is identifying those patterns, and that's why it's telling you it's option A and not B, C, or D. So Remember that, don't go back. One thing is to mark for review, but don't be changing your question. Trust your instinct, trust your preparation, trust your muscle memory, and trust believe in yourself, right? So don't go back and change answers unless you know, oh, I remembered I didn't pick the right answer. I go back and change it. But you have to be 100% sure that that's the case, right? So that's part of strategy and more than the exam experience. And then for the strategy section, this might sound trivial, but read the full question. Read the full question, because otherwise you're gonna start forming wrong assumptions in your mind about the right answer, and that's a recipe for destruction. Read the full question. Also, in many questions, as we have said before during the class, there are keywords. There are going to be some keywords. What are those keywords? Some of them. What is the best course of action? What is the next thing that the project manager should do? What is the most likely outcome? What is the least likely outcome? Identify your keywords. And in order to do that, you have to read the full question. Most of the questions, since we said they are situational, they are about solving problems. PMI wants you to use the tools and techniques that you learn throughout the content and fix issues, fix those scenarios with what you have available, those tools. They want you to be proactive. That's why escalation is usually the wrong answer. They want you to do something, fix that with what you have, and be proactive. Fix issues with people and plans, and fix the situation as a project manager. Take charge and do and solve the problem with what you have available. Most questions are going to be geared that way. And also, you have to come up with your own plan for the exam, your strategy, right? It is important, but be ready to be agile. Things can change, right? Now you have the breaks built in, and you know that you're going to plan on 60 seconds, but have a plan. You know yourself better than anybody else. You know what works for you. You know what doesn't work for you. Have your plan, but that plan has to be flexible. You have to be ready to be agile because conditions can and things can change. So be ready, have an open mind, and be ready for any changes that might come your way, and be flexible and be ready to change your plan. So the tips here are, first one is decide whether online, from home, Proctor version, or testing center. Work on your time management skills. And how do you do that? Your simulator, that's your best friend right there. And then develop your own plan for the exam. This is my course of action. I'm gonna work on 60 seconds per question. I'll take my break. I'm only gonna take 5 minutes of my break, etc. Have your plan, but when the time comes, be ready to make adjustments. That's how you're gonna be successful. And some recommendations. The first one is very important. Please use the Pmp Simulator. How many questions do I have to take to be ready for the exam? The answer is in the thousands, 1,500 to be ready for the exam, as many as you can. Review the Pmp exam content outline. That is what you're going to be tested on. You have to review that and be aware of that. Also, review the content that we covered, right? So you have your official PMI student kit, and you also have your peak enhanced student kit. So review that, work on your address your weaknesses, identify them, address them, and cover that and review that. You also have access to recordings of our classes, and review that and make sure that you are able to address those weaknesses and really get ready for the exam and take practice questions. It is a good idea to read the Pinbox 6th edition, but some sections, like I mentioned, the introduction, the book is almost 700 pages long. We don't expect you to read the whole thing, but what would I read? The introduction sections, the Agile considerations per knowledge area, and the glossary. That has a lot of good information about the terminology. Make sure that you're familiar with that terminology. Those are the sections that I would recommend. Then the second most important reference is the Agile practice guide. Everything about Agile is going to be in the exam. It's going to be there. So, but you also have it in your student kit. But reading the Agile Practice Guide is a recommendation. When you take your practice questions, by now, none of you should be using the training mode on the simulator. Get used to the clock. The clock has to become your best friend, not your enemy. So don't use it as a crutch. Get used to the real experience. By now, none of you should be using the training mode on your PMP simulator. And then again, use your PMP simulator. And you're gonna get ready for your exam. Probably more important than your instructor, by the way. So those are some recommendations, and these are some additional resources. We have some links to the whiteboard, the test taker resources. You might have in there also how to do how to run the system check for some of you. Also the official PMI link to Pearson VUE. Another resource that we have provided to some of you, but we have to send this information to all of you. There is a flow for the process, the 49 process of the Pmp 6 edition, which is the only version, official version of the Pmp, by the way. 7th edition is not out yet, so don't worry about that. This PDF document, and also there's a 1-hour YouTube video is created by Ricardo Vargas, will help you to understand the flow. Everything starts with a scope. There's a way, there's a cadence that any project follows that might help you in understanding the flow of those processes and put things into context mentally, right? For both predictive and adaptive. We have the link to our Basecamp, and also, of course, the link to the official information from PMI. Trusting the official information. No hearsay. There's a lot of misinformation out there in regards to the exam. You focus on what you have. You have all the resources to be successful. We're here for you, and we have enough information to help you, and we're pulling for you. We believe in you, and you're gonna pass that exam. You're definitely gonna pass that exam. So